Hello, guys. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Greg Lane, and this is Uncommon Sense. In this show, we're going to talk about the importance of rules and regulations. Now, I know what you guys are probably thinking, Greg, why are you trying to bore us with rules and regulations? Well, here's particularly why. Because of the results of the general election, it would appear that Donald Trump will be stepping down as president this coming January, and Joe Biden will be sworn in as the 46th president. Now, in the last 4 years, Donald Trump has touted many things about his presidency. One of them in particular was about how he is a deregulation president. Now, many believe that's a good thing. I do not, and I have to explain why. Deregulation to me is getting rid of rules in a house. Now, some rules might be outdated or need to be updated, and that's okay. But just getting rid of regulations because apparently they put a so-called undue burden on people when they actually do a greater service is a ridiculous sentiment. For instance, there are some regulations that we enjoy that frankly, many people may not realize it. For instance, have you ever wondered why those exit signs at businesses are lit and clearly visible? Well, it's because of a fire that happened in 1911. It happened at a building that's now called the Brown Building that's currently owned by NYU. 100 somewhat years ago, it was known as the Osh Building. And on the 23rd and 26th and all the floors in between, there was a garment factory called the Triangle Waist Shirt Factory. It was called that because it primarily produced blouses for women. Now, on a fateful day in 1911, a fire broke out. It was the result of a garment scrap bin catching fire, possibly because of a cigarette or any of the other machinery that was operating in the facility. A common practice at the time was locking their employees inside the factories to prevent theft, unauthorized breaks, or leaving without permission. I don't know why they didn't just pay someone to watch the door, but this was also in a time where employees made between $7 to $12 a week, working 52 hours a week. And when you adjust the numbers for today's dollars, that means that employees at that factory made between $3.50 an hour to $6.25 an hour. Even the highest rate was a full dollar below the federal minimum wage. When the fire broke out, the business managers did not release the employees as they should have. They didn't go downstairs to unlock the doors and make sure everyone could escape. Instead, they flew. They went to the higher floors or they went to the lower floors and escaped the flames. The employees that were stuck in there, most of them were women, most of them were between the ages of 14 and 23. 146 individuals died. They died from fire, smoke inhalation, or they fell to their deaths when they jumped out of the building. As a result of that, there were charges brought against the factory owners. Unfortunately, they were acquitted of manslaughter charges because they questioned the validity of the witnesses that retold the events of that night. However, in the aftermath of that, there were many activists who decided to make changes. One of them in particular was a woman by the name of Rose Schneiderman, who was a socialist and a feminist. Along with being a regulation and employees' rights activist, she was also a suffragist who helped in the effort to pass the 19th Amendment in 1917. As a result, the American Society of Safety Professionals was formed, and as a result, America went forward with a lot of employee regulations. Some of the first minimum wage laws were passed. Work hours regulations were passed. Not only that, but exits were required to be accessible to employees for their safety. A lot of great things happened. Unfortunately, it took the deaths of 146 women and men and children to die in order for that to happen. And to me, that is insane. Although regulation is not always easy to achieve. Another legislation that revolves around regulation would actually be the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It took about 100 years after the Civil War for this act to be passed, despite the fact that for the majority of the century afterwards, several southern states instituted Jim Crow laws which tried everything in their power to abridge the rights of minority votes and their rights to do anything. It took 100 years of individuals and communities being put under the thumb of others in order for them to say, enough is enough, this is our house too, and our country too, we deserve the same equality and chances that you have. The idea of rolling back those kind of regulations that do so much to protect the rights and the safety of so many is abhorrent to me. Another such regulation that frankly should be passed is legislation that would prevent certain slap suits. For those of you who don't know, slap suits is defined by being a strategic lawsuit against public participation. SLAP. These lawsuits are not meant to actually solve anything. If anything, they are meant to intimidate people from speaking out against corporations or newspapers, and they are very effective. In fact, one such user of slap suits was actually Donald Trump. Many years ago, when a biographer estimated his net worth at close to $250 million instead of over $5 billion, he actually sued the biographer for about, ironically, $5 billion. Now, of course, the lawsuit took a number of years, and of course it got dismissed. But in retrospect, Trump actually mentioned and admitted that he knew he couldn't win the lawsuit, but he just wanted to make the guy's life a living hell. And frankly, that's what slap suits are about. They're meant to drain the defendant's bank account for lawyers' fees, and they're meant to make a show of force in regards to capital ability to hire lawyers and pursue legislation. Well, not legislation, litigation. There are many states that actually have anti-slap legislation on the books. And at the core of it, it is essentially having to prove what your case actually is, or at least make a case what it is, before it early on in the process in order to keep it from dragging on. Unfortunately, these are state legislations and they vary in level of proof, and there are still many states that have no such legislation and there's no federal form of it. Regulations are essentially rules for the house that is our country. And frankly, it makes a lot of sense. If you're a parent with a teenager that doesn't like to take the trash out of his room or keep it clean, and you end up with an ant or a rat infestation, that is definitely proof that rules need to be in place that that kid or that teenager needs to take care of their space better. And if a factory dumps its waste products into the river that happens to be the water supply of the town downstream, frankly, when the townspeople start getting sick as a result of it, that's a sign that the factory should have to dispel its waste products in a more responsible way and possibly pay for the damages and the health hazards that it has caused those people downstream. Getting rid of regulations may seem like a way to encourage capitalism, but frankly, all it does is free up money for rich people, and if anyone who has studied trickle-down economics can tell you, just because you give money to rich people doesn't mean they're going to share it with the rest of us. Because we live in a country where we celebrate the rich and their vast stores of wealth, and unfortunately, they're not very much inclined or really pushed to share it with the rest of us. So in my opinion, regulations are like rules of a house. They may be a pain in the butt to some. They're a pain to those who have to enforce it. They're a pain to those who have to abide by it. But in the end, it's about being responsible, it's about being safe, and frankly, regulations are a lot more important than rules. Rules on kids in your house will affect that kid. Maybe they will wreck their life, maybe they'll succeed because of it. However, when corporations and governments are not held by regulations, they can do a lot worse. They can affect more people, and they can affect them in deeper and more destructive ways than any kid can on their own. So, if anyone is nervous about Joe Biden rolling back some of the deregulation laws or repeals that have happened over the last 4 years, or if you're concerned he's going to do other things like increase the minimum wage and do more protections for certain groups, ask yourself why you're actually afraid of it. Are you afraid that that businesses are going to be subjected to laws that are meant to protect you? Or are you just following the same I don't want to live by certain rules narrative that a lot of rebellious kids are following? It didn't work for rebellious kids who turned out to not amount to much as a result of not abiding by responsibilities. And frankly, I don't think this is really a path we want to go down any further. So, If regulations are being forced upon businesses and large entities in order to treat us better, pay us better, and also protect us from harm and malpractice, I say bring it on. And as always, at the end of the show, I like to share to you things to avoid. Now, in this case, something to avoid would be supermarkets that are owned by management groups. Or, actually, even further than that, businesses that are owned by management groups. Now, the reason to avoid businesses that are owned by management groups is because they're designed to milk you for money and they're designed to be more expensive. In any other business, there is the usual 4 levels of employment. There's your hourly workers, there's your managers, your district managers, and then your chief executive officers. Now, that's a basic line of payment and employment, and it's actually the role of market basket. However, when you deal with a company like Shaw's, Stop & Shop, and Hannaford's that has a management group, there's a level on top of the chief executive officers that also has to be paid. And as a result, they have their executive officers and their assistants and their facilities. So, it's an unnecessary addition to the hierarchy of pay and level of employment that all it does for the rest of us is drive up prices. So, if you can, do research on certain businesses that are owned by certain entities. If you can avoid shopping from a business that is owned by a management company, you'll find that usually the prices are much lower. But still, sometimes if you do want to take advantage of lower prices over there, subscribe to their coupon books. That's how we manage to get the lower prices, and smarter shopping is always the way to go. That's my show. Thank you for tuning in. And as common sense becomes rarer and rarer, hold on to it as long as you can. Good night, everybody.